So the World Bank in Nigeria last week released a new updated report on Nigeria's development for the year 2022. That report outlined what it called Nigeria's choice in terms of making economic progress. In the meantime, the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit finished off in Washington. And so it's another opportunity for Nigeria to oil its relationship with the United States, the world's #1 economy. Digging into these latest two headlines for me on the macroeconomic side is Paul Alaje, who is the senior economist at SPM Professionals. Paul, good evening to you, live to us from Abuja studios. Thank you very much for coming to this one. What do you make of the World Bank Development Report, the last version of it for the year with the update?
Well, what I make of it is Nigeria must be ready to do business unusual. From the report, it has revealed that Nigeria has been doing business as usual since after the 2000s. It has been the usual practice, usual way, padding, pushing, kicking the can down the street. That is what I can summarize most of the things I've seen in the report that was released by World Bank. And if you go into the specific, World Bank is worried that Nigeria has added poverty. The number of people that are living in extreme poverty has since increased to over 80 million people. When you compare that with some countries' population, it will worry us that we seem to have warehoused more poor people. Earlier this year, a report has been released by even Nigerian authority, talking of the National Bureau of Statistics and an international organization, that Nigeria has over 130 million people living in multidimensional poverty. This report is saying the choice is in our hands, whether we want to liberate our people from poverty or not. There are decisions we might take. There are choices that are tough that we must take now, even before President Buhari leaves office come next year, May.
So this report was entitled Nigeria's Choice. So I'm asking, how important is that choice, as it were, both political and economic, right now, where we are at this point in our history?
Well, the choice is for Nigeria is very critical. We are faced with a presidential election in a matter of months, and also gubernatorial election. Legislature will be re-elected into offices. If we choose wrongly, it may take us another set of years, maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 20, before we get back to the level that we are right now. We have the opportunity to make key decisions, to make tough choices now. And if you ask me, what are the choices? According to the report, Nigeria must protect poor and vulnerable more. Nigeria needs to reconsider our decision on subsidy, whether we want to keep subsidy or not. We must also make policy around exchange rate. As exchange rate has multiple windows, we need to unify the exchange rate today. See, this report mentions a lot of things that you and I have discussed time and again on this show, and many other persons have discussed. You recall that in 2019, we had a program just around June, when President Buhari had mentioned in 2019, June 12, that he wants to take 100 million out of poverty. And as we speak, rather than seeing more people coming out of poverty, the opposite seems to be the case. We also need, according to the report, make decisions around private sector. How do we create institution, macroeconomic economic policies and structural reforms that can return us to the gains of early 2000, where we saw Nigeria grow up to 7%, 6%, and even sometimes not too long ago, about 9-10 years ago, where we saw some sporadic growth. It's important, according to the report, that Nigeria even generate more revenue from oil and non-oil sector. We also try to reduce poverty significantly beyond what we are doing today. So these are things that have been raised in this report, and we sincerely hope the authority will not just get the report, file it in the archives, but ask for support from the best of our policymakers and experts in the country to help us implement some of the things that has been raised by the World Bank in this latest report.
Well, so Paul, just a quick one. When this report was released, talk about Nigeria's choice, and like you rightly said, there's hardly anything new being said here in a manner of speaking. So, do you think the multilateral institutions and others, the World Bank, the IMF, the AFDB, and others, do you think they are beginning to get tired that they keep talking and giving advice and policy advice and what we should do, but we don't seem to be able to have what it takes to get off the ground and take the bull by the horn and turn the economy and our social lives around? Do you think it's getting to that point in which it looks like the more this information, the more advice and policies advice we get, the less we're able to implement?
Really, I'm sure the multilateral organization are getting frustrated, not just tired, just the way some of us might be feeling, when it comes to providing useful, needful advice that have transformed some other environment, and we're providing the same thing in our homes. Rather than seeing implementation, people still want to do business as usual, quote unquote, and that is the way it is in the report. Until we understand that for us to have economic prosperity, we must take tough decisions that will be respectful of no person. Unfortunately, that is not what we are seeing. And many people have even felt, well, it's another report, let's release it. We hope that someday. And this is what takes me to your earlier question in terms of providing answers to that. If those who are reading this report cannot provide the difference, if they cannot implement them to help our people come out of poverty, hunger, deprivation, and hunger, then those of us who are Nigerians, we must be willing to change them to bring those who can implement this policy so that we can have prosperity in place of hunger and need. We can have it in place. But those who are there today, if they are sure they want to provide Nigeria with useful decision, with needful decision, and tough decision at the same time, I think it will be the beginning. That will be the beginning of a different chapter entirely. But are they frustrated? Are they tired? I think so. Even from the tone of the language, it appears they are saying, Nigeria, we have told you to do this. Now the choice is yours.
Now the choice is yours. Now the choice is yours. The choice is ours as to how we move forward and implement this. But let me just let's change gear and talk about the U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, which ended last week in Washington. What's your view on that particular summit? 45 African leaders and others. What do you think? Do you think we made a good showing over there? Was it worth it? Paul?
So you can just be there.
Please go ahead, Paul.
Am I being heard now?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Yes, so United States need that belief, need that confidence from those that it thinks elite around the world to also want to follow that kind of leadership. Africans is it's a continent that many people are attracted to. We have seen what China is doing in Africa. Nigeria has benefited directly from what China has done. And United States have seen the importance of investing in Africa. That is why perhaps the president announced around $55 billion investment, because this is what Africa needs now. And United States also need partners. They need allies beyond just having traditional allies. Is important because someday Africa will get there. But who will earn the trust of Africa, an African nation? And this is why I think it's important that we have that this conference held beyond the talks, beyond all of the politics, and so on and so forth. Recall that some African countries have embraced democracy, and the leader of the democratic process of democracy around the world remains the United States. So investment is key. Partnership is key. Mutual trust, the way Africans look at the United States and the way United States look at Africa, it's also changing. At least this has provided a foundation. And in fact, the president has said he will be going with high-ranking member visiting Africa in 2023. So we have seen some President Obama was in Africa. We also saw a number of leaders, president in the United States have visited Africa for show of solidarity and investment, and to tell American investors that it is safe for you to come. Now, how African leaders present themselves, you know, in the face of possible investment is a different conversation entirely. This we start with an electoral process. Are the will of the people allowed to prevail in election? That's on one hand. On the other hand, is government tackling insecurity headlong so that it becomes safe for those that want to put their investment in our continent, for the rest of Africa, and more importantly, for our country, Nigeria.
What do you think the takeaways were for Nigeria at that summit last week?
Well, a number of takeaways from us as a country. As read the article written by the special assistant to the president on some of the things he said, the recommendation that president might have earned, and so on and so forth. So, but for Nigeria, we are the largest country in Africa. So investment opportunity might be open to us. If you check what National Bureau of Statistics have reported over the quarters, you see that investment, foreign direct investment, seems to be dwindling, even though it has not disappeared completely. But we cannot say this is what is expected from us. Two, it also provides that opportunity for us to reopen a fresh chapter with some of the world powers. And he also mentioned that Nigeria could also be considering, or Nigeria could be considered for that G20 permanent slot in the around the world. So a lot of things that Nigeria can do, and a lot of things Nigeria has also learned, and I hope that President Buhari and his team will domesticate some of the things that happen in that conference at home.
Okay, so here we are about wrapping up the year 2022. We've got a few days left. So how would you describe the country's macroeconomic balance sheet in the outgoing year?
Well, this year, to be very sincere, there are a lot of imbalances, even though some things seem to have been stable. So I'll start with one of the major macroeconomic variables, which is on the positive. We have seen GDP remain positive at over 3%. But quickly, when you look at inflation as we speak, inflation has jumped outside the roof, not just jumping to the roof. It's already over 21%. Unemployment is still very high, even though recent report has not been released. So we go with the last report on unemployment. If you look at even exchange rate, the parallel market is over 700 at official rate, over 440, about 445. Today from your report, it appears to be flat on an e-window. So when you look at these macroeconomic variables, which is positive, which is negative, if I'm allowed to look beyond macroeconomic variable, but key indicators, you know, fundamentals that we also need to check. Education. This year we had the longest strike by ASU, but thankfully government was able to resolve with public institutions, universities, to go back to school. I hope that we would have learned from this year that what brought that strike would be stopped so that we don't experience it not anymore. It will never happen in our history again. Health is another major concern because income, education, and health are the things that we put together to have human development index. Health, there is no particular spectacular difference from what we had in previous year, in this year. So, but looking beyond this year, because this year is few days to go, what we should be looking at is 2023. How do we set an agenda for government? President Buhari, people are saying the next government, but President Buhari still has almost half a year to do. We don't need 20 years to rehearse madness. What can we do before he leaves office and the new persons that may win out of all the contestants, whosoever wins, will the person be pro-market? Will he allow for free market? Will he allow for competitiveness among private sector operators? Will there be high level of transparency beyond just fighting corruption? Will there be high level of transparency in government process? Government SOPs will be squarely followed in terms of implementation of government policy, issuing contract, and so on and so forth. These are things also, will government generate more revenue? Because if you don't generate revenue, you must finance at least your recurrent and part of your capex, capital expenditure. Will government generate more revenue? Are we going to see significant increase in oil revenue and also in non-oil revenue? We have seen a lot of revelation that you journalists make us see, earlier in the year, how significant proportion of our crude has been piped to another location, an unknown location, and we wonder why our oil revenue is dwindling. The latest report, we are back as the largest oil producer in Africa. This is the position we should have maintained. These are funds that have been lost because of partial carelessness, greed, and looking the other way on the part of those that we entrusted our full votes to, and they look the other way. But thankfully, the brightest of Nigerian journalists, you came together, you revealed to the world what has happened to our Commonwealth, and we are now taking it back gradually. I hope that in the coming period, we'll be able to sustain the momentum, and this will not repeat itself in 2023. But on the global scene, if America goes to a recession and China goes back on lockdown, I'm afraid, no matter what we do, the externalities may have tremendous impact, not only on Nigeria, but the entire African continent. And if if the impact extends to crude and the sales of oil or purchase of it, then I'm afraid Nigeria may still be going below the population growth rate of 2.6%, according to the World Bank report.
Alaje, you sum it up, that's Nigeria's choice, according to that World Bank report. Thank you so much, senior economist at SPM Professionals. Do have a great evening, and we thank you for your views and insights as always.